Hello, my name is John, and today I'm here to talk a little bit about the sport of fencing. To start us off, I'm going to show you all a clip of a classic example of fencing from a popular movie. Please refer to slide 2 for the clip. In this presentation, I'm going to go over how fencing started, how it became popular and common, and how it transitioned into the sport that we know it as today. Originally, fencing was not as structured as we know it is today. It began as duels. These duels were used to solve personal disputes, typically about one's honor, used to solve political arguments, and they were critical to war. For example, when two armies went to battle, often they would each send one combatant out to the field, and these combatants would duel. Whoever the winner was, that army won that battle and spared much bloodshed. One thing that helped further the cause for fencing was the writing of many treatises. These served as instructional journals for the activity. These treatises were an effort at uniformity for the activity. Prior to the treatises being written, there was no standards or rules for fencing. By writing these journals, it gave fencers structure, rules, and techniques that they could use. This, in effect, made fencing a much more studious activity. These treatises also led to different schools of fencing. So around the world, many different countries had different approaches to fencing and different tactics that they would practice. These treatises were proliferated by the development of the printing press. One of the first major treatises was called A Treatise on Arms, and this was written by Diego de Valera, a Spaniard. This was written sometime between 1458 and 1471. As I said, this was the first massively produced treatise. So this also served as a tool for which fencers could learn and practice their skills, and as I said before, bring some uniformity to the sport. This, in turn, also made fencing more academic pursuit because one could study and practice as opposed to just fence on their own. Unfortunately, fencing was banned shortly after by the Spanish monarchs during this period. As I said, there were many different schools of fencing. One popular school was the Italian school. In Italy, fencing was extremely popular even among the common people. Practically everybody was fencing and everyone carried a weapon. Because it was so popular, some of the greatest masters of fencing came from this country. France also had a huge part to play. The French actually developed most of the terminology that we know today in fencing, such as parry and riposte. Also, France is where the foil, the modern fencing weapon, was born. Also, in Germany, this is where fencing really had academic clout, and also where the popularity of thrust fencing, as opposed to sideways cut fencing, was made popular. England was also a unique school that focused on combat weapons such as the sword and buckler and the longsword, as opposed to the rapier, which they called fashionable bird spits and thought of as impractical. So the weapons used in fencing have progressed very much. The English tended to prefer combat arms such as the sword and buckler and the longsword, but overall we transitioned into lighter one-handed weapons and then into the rapier, which is very similar to what we know as the foil today. The rapier and the foil were great light weapons that were much more practical for fencing. So the foil was light and it had a pointed tip with a triangular blade. Its lightness made sure that you could jab and poke very quickly and pierce vital organs, and the triangular blade helped you parry other opponents' blades and protect your weapon without it getting damaged too severely. So society also impacted fencing. So fencing used to be a necessity for dueling, but eventually it transitioned into a hobby and something that people studied and enjoyed very much. This was very much due to the evolution of treatises and the fact that many more were written thanks to the printing press. Also, World War I made fencing impractical, so eventually it transitioned from war to sport. So fencing is played in bouts, where each player has to get to 5 points, and the referees are aided by an electronic system. There are 3 weapon types: the saber, the foil, and the epee, which on slide 13 there are pictures of. The epee is slow paced and has an emphasis on critical thinking. When you play with the epee, you want to trick your opponent into making moves and exploit those mistakes. The foil is very critical to skill and introduced something called the right of way. The saber is the fastest paced weapon, and most of your strategy occurs before the point. In conclusion, fencing began as violent duels and transitioned into a popular pastime and eventually into a very diverse sport.